presentation, so they were really interesting. The one thing that kept cropping up in my mind was ecological connectivity. You were talking, Hugh, because that's the thing that's not legislated, and that we don't have any grip on as a community to write on because it's not statutory. But it's the missing link with a lot of things like climate change and the parlous state of how little was reserved now and how little was remaining. And to me that's a really vital thing. But how do we get the EPA to engage on that point?
Thanks, Kate. It's a fantastic. You all hear us okay? It's a fantastic question, and if I can draw a parallel to another process that's going on at the moment. So there's the draft forest management plan, and there's work with the WA Forest Alliance and others, and Daniel Jan Martin put together the Beyond 2024. So looking at what will be, there's quite a lot of work to see where the areas will be within the forest. So that's the northern Jarrah forest all the way down to the southern forest and all the areas in between. And the basic principle is that in a changing climate, you want large, contiguous, formally protected areas as much as possible. So Daniel's work in the Jarrah forest in particular, but also the other areas, was looking at trying to get those connections both east-west across, say, the northern Jarrah forest, but also along from the coastal areas inward, the southern areas as well. And so I think taking what Professor Torrance was talking about in terms of the Swan Coastal Plain it's exactly the same thing. And it's the same where the work in the row 8, row 9 of trying to get the corridors. And so we just need to get that corridor concept and those large contiguous, formally protected areas so that they are a great thing in a changing climate, as you said. Yeah. And I guess just to draw a point on that is that probably thinking and encouraging the EPA to do that Section 16E advice, picking up the System 6 is probably a good place to start, if that makes sense.
Can I just say that there's been a few things that have been done recently, like Christina O'Donnell's thesis at Murdoch Uni about connectivity, which she really did a detailed assessment. It was very good. One of the conclusions were that without bush forever and without all those incidental areas of trees, that the prognosis for the wildlife that's preserved in the nature reserves and the Class A reserves, the prognosis for the survival of those species is very bad. So it's not just an add-on, it's an absolute necessity now. And the row 9 thing is really important because it's really the only east-west corridor. And it's a really good model. It's a bit like a mini Gondwana link. And like people, I'm in the International Connectivity Group, and they say about Australia, they say you've got fantastic theory and analysis about where the links should go, but your actual implementation is shite. And it's really true. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. The one thing I would just point out is that as Kate and others have been involved, so Kate did a wonderful floristic survey with the Brixton Street wetlands, but there's work there in terms of a regional park, and that's another area along with, so there's sort of a triumvirate of things. So there's regional parks, trying to get them as high a conservation status as possible, as Tim pointed out. There's bush forever areas, and then trying to get an integrated sort of connectivity. So there's sort of work and a schema of things of trying to get these, whether it's regional parks or bush forever areas.
Yeah. Right, Robin.
Oh, and wetlands too.
Thank you. This way.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure who to direct the question to, but it's regarding clearing for fire breaks and clearing for fire hazard reduction. It's called now, isn't it? Yeah. At Erindale Road, Erindale Road Bushland, which is the area that we're hoping to protect. The proponent there put in a subdivision, an application to subdivide that land, and then they submitted that to the local council. But it's also before the EPA at the moment. But they had public open space within their subdivision, but they removed that they put in a second, the EPA asked them to come back with more information. When they came back with more information, they changed their offset proposals. So we've got an issue with offsets as well, because originally they were proposing offsets in Gin or somewhere, but now they've come back and they're proposing offsets on the large part of their land. So they're actually wanting to offset their clearing with their own land that is adjacent to it. But they also moved the public open space and made it an asset protection zone. So they're actually combining the two, saying, oh, this is now the public open space, but it's also it's called an asset protection zone. And I just wondered whether those sorts of tricks that they seem to get up to, we'll obviously challenge that with the EPA, but it's, I just wondered if that's a sort of a thing.
Have we got any takers?
There are some exemptions in the clearing regulations for the requirement for a clearing permit for fire hazard reduction. Although they're limited in extent and exactly how much that would be applicable in that situation, I'm not sure, because I just don't really have the details about the proposal. But I mean, the main thing I think in this case is that if it's in front of the EPA, and if you said there's already a subdivision approval, but if it's in front of the EPA, then there's an opportunity to raise those issues with the EPA as part of the process. I think so. I'd be suggesting that I would be doing that.
It's that using asset protection zone as the public open space requirement. I just thought that was a bit odd.
Yes, I mean, you could certainly advocate that. But again, I'm just not across the board. It's really hard to provide information about it without really detailed information about the status of all the different approvals. Whether there's, for example, a development approval involved, is there rezoning? So also there's a subdivision approval that's already been given.
Well, only for the whole of the land, not a.
So the proposal for public open space / asset protection, what's that context? So that's a scheme amendment, is it? Or
yes, it would be.
Right, it's a scheme amendment. So that is if there is an opportunity to make public comment on the scheme amendment, that is the place to be advocating about that particular land use claim. It would be hard to do that in front of the EPA because it's not really an environmental issue whether or not fire hazard reduction and public open space can coincide. So that is the place to be advocating. If you want to say there should be additional public open space, for example, or public open space should be vegetated rather than a cleared area, then that planning scheme process, because they're essentially planning considerations from a legal point of view. So that's in my view, that would be the best place to be advocating on that point. Do you want to add anything to that?
Just reminds us of the complexity of this whole environment. Lynn.
My question, of which no notice has been given, does refer to some of the things you talked about, and it's in two parts because I always like to get two bites of the cherry. So the first one is, you talked about trying to reverse the onus onto the developer. Could we do that by a moratorium on all clearing? And how do we do that? And can we launch that campaign now? But the second part of maybe you could have explained how we do that, if there is some mechanism in the act that we could use, or if we could move a motion or an amendment or something. And then secondly, the other question is, thank goodness this government has stopped logging in old growth forests. Is it possible to convince them that some of these urban blocks meet the criteria of forest? And I refer to Yakamaya Bushland, where it does have old growth in it. And how do we get them to consider that that is also, should be protected under that policy.
Alright, so how do you get a moratorium on clearing? Well, that's an interesting one. I mean, there's a few mechanisms. First, you need to get political support for it. That's probably the hard part. I think the actual legal mechanisms to do it are... Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So the hard part would be getting political support for it, but I guess that's what campaigning is for. But
So would it just be that they would issue a policy, or is it, could you do that in the Clearing Act or in the EP Act?
I'm just thinking about that. So there's a system for creating environmental protection policies under the Environmental Protection Act that have the effect of subsidiary legislation, and there used to be an environmental protection policy for lakes and wetlands in the metropolitan area. So that might be one way of doing it. That involves a statutory process of the EPA being involved in public submissions, and then it has to be approved by the minister. So it's a fairly convoluted process. You might make an amendment to in fact, probably the simplest way from the point of view of the legal mechanism would be to make an amendment to the clearing regulations to introduce a moratorium through the regulations. I mean, it's similar to the way that it was done with fracking. So when the government had a moratorium on fracking and a scientific inquiry, they introduced some regulations that created the moratorium. So potentially you could do it by, and perhaps it's a bit on the fly to say the question without notice, so I'd have to think about how effective that would be. So I had to put some caveats on that. You'd actually have to see whether or not it was feasible to do it that way, because the general provisions about clearing are in the Act, so it becomes a question about whether the provisions that allow for clearing permits to be granted could actually be, for example, overridden by regulation. And I'm a little bit sceptical about that, unless there's a schedule to the Act that gives a list of all the different items that regulations can be made about. And if I'd be looking at those and trying to form a view about whether or not you could do it by regulations. Otherwise, you might need an Act amendment.
So
Piece of legislation.
So perhaps it's something that we can come and have a conversation with you at a later time, Tim.
You
Absolutely.
could take it on notice.
So we have one final question.
What about the forest, the old growth forest? You didn't answer that bit.
Thanks. So I'm here as a member of the Friends of Yellow Regional Park. I'm not a rep. I want to raise, that leads to a question, the process of development of recognition of being a stakeholder.
Right, just holding your microphone up.
That there's need, in my view, there's need to become recognised as a stakeholder by a lot of groups and individuals by making early recommendations to any of the entities that are represented in government, to make recommendations very early, way before any plans or applications are put in, and certainly long before submissions are called for specific approvals. That you get informed of the approvals earlier if you're recognised as a stakeholder.
So is that enough for you, one of you, to answer? So I think this is about
more
early...
of a statement than a question so far.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tim. Now, my question is, what is the forum or method that we need to hear about and act on that draws together the various administrators of acts, state and federal, including the focus of the day has been EP Act, and the Health Act also got a mention. So there are some broad interests, federal, state and local government. How do we get a single forum or method to consider all of these things in entirety? Thanks.
No, it's a great question. Thanks, Ray. And we were at this stage about 20 years ago when we were talking about sustainability, decision making, and sustainability in the government, trying to tie things together. One of the things about how the EP Act works is that it's imperfect, but it tries to front end the environmental considerations in the process and to have a focus on that. And so the planning process tends to be more integrated of bringing things together. And so it takes, I think, a little bit of thinking in terms of how you come up ultimately with a process which tries to bring everything together and who that decision maker should be and how that occurs. I think in the context of the system we have now, and climate change is another one, is that these are all health-related issues. And so that looking at environmental issues and looking at climate change issues apart from health and apart from community health and apart from individual health it's not the way to do it. And so it's, I think, trying to get that trying to creep that in, probably not the right word, but trying to get that integrated so we can get better decision making. And I was having a really good talk with Sally, is that for the EPA, for example, to take those things to take health into consideration, there has to be that direct linkage between the bushland and, so it's really the people who are using the bushland who are directly affected by the bushland. And that's where all of the groups are users and people who live by the areas. And that's a really important value, and I think something we can really change and just increase the value. I know it's not a perfect answer to your question, Ray, but I think it's a broader one of how we bring these issues together in a better way and how we go about not just environmental decision making, but planning decisioning across the board.
Thanks, Hugh. Ray, the only thing I'd add to that, I guess, is your question in part was sort of related about what would sort of seem to me to be a question about what would sort of the structure be, or how would you, I mean, in a way it would have to be something that would have to be created, I think. So you would need to be drawing individual relevant decision makers, whether it was government ministers or heads of department or industry leaders, and trying to create some sort of round table or summit or something like that to address the issue. But I mean, maybe that's the way to do it.
Okay, right. Just a big solution.
Yeah,
just a really big solution. Now, Beth.
I just have a correction. The Premier announced that there will be an end to native forest logging, not just old growth, native forest logging.
Sorry about that.
And the bastards who are doing the draft management plan have already changed that. There's an end to extensive commercial timber harvesting, so we can do a little bit more of something else that's still logging.
Thank you, Beth.
All right.
15 seconds.
Thanks, Beth. Sorry. I just wanted to answer the other part of your question there.
Yay!
So the forest management, I mean, you could certainly argue that the forest management plan should include urban forest as part of that process.
At what forum?
The
current submission.
Yeah,
Forest
submissions.
management. Yeah.
So that would be a blanket change.
I guess there's some complexity in terms of, because
Right.
whether they're
Sorry, we're running out of time.
We are well over. We are well over.
I think there's a question about what the DVCA meant.
We've probably got time for a couple of questions to Mary and Marg. If anyone would like to ask a question.
Just coming back to the main road comment.
This is the main roads comment.
Yeah. With all the clearing that they've done down south of Bunbury all the way to Capel, the Suze Road turn-off, is there an offset against what they're doing? Yeah.
Carolyn, do you want to come up and
A lot of that was.
There is.
A lot of that proposal was formally assessed by the EPA, the Bunbury Outer Ring Road, the various sections. Certainly the southern section has been.
step carefully.
And it's good that you raised that point, because
Step carefully.
I was going to come up and have a word. I was coming up and have a word about it as well. As you're aware, some of you are aware, I've been the one who's been battling all of the quarries there for the outer regional road, and indeed to comment on Marg's specifics with regards to the main roads, insisting that each of those quarries have to be within a short distance to cut the costs of transport. There's 40. So I barely have the chance to put my head down or put a pen down, and it's non-stop. The EPA, at the time they assessed the Bunbury Outer Regional Road, there were submissions that went through to the EPA to insist that the clearing areas, vegetation, hydrology of all of those quarries that were providing BRM, such as gravel, which is sand, which is limestone. All of those areas should have been assessed in with the whole of the Bunbury Outer Regional Road. He refused to accept that, so it was on appeal. He said that there was no need to look at the impacts of all those quarries. They're handled by their own local government guidelines and DWER guidelines. So it hasn't been looked at. And if anything, there's probably, if I sat down and calculated each quarry, probably hundreds of more hectares of clearing. So the offsets, main roads own their own quarries in the areas, and the image that Mark showed a few minutes ago, the Kemerton clearing as well for the expansion of that area, which is for Albemarle's lithium plant. The buffers that are there are areas for extractive industries. So those buffers can be mined. So we're being kicked in the arse non-stop. And so it's a very sad situation. I would say that most of you, if I can, I'll get emails out at times so most of you can come on board and pick up on this and protest. Main roads own quite a few of those quarries in those areas. And indeed, main roads have put aside offsets, so where they may have land in a mile up of 40 hectares, they'll say that 19 hectares is for BRM, for quarry materials, and the remainder of it is for offsets for black cockatoo and western ringtail possum in an area of mile up that's nowhere near Jallora. So these are the failures, and these are a lot of the areas that are not being adequately addressed.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thank you, Carolyn. So I think we'll just take a last question from Kate. Is it question or comment?
Well, it can be both.
Does
anybody know the number of priority ecological communities that have been sitting on the Minister's list for years that he has failed to approve as threatened ecological communities? All these priority ecological communities were put up by scientists on the basis of evidence. Does anybody know the number?
No, tell us.
390 in the state. So that just gives you an indication the situation is far worse than you think. And this quarry business comes right into it too.
Right. So I think we're finishing on a quite a serious, a somber note of I guess sometimes you wonder whether or not submissions make a difference. But if we weren't in the space, what would happen? So I think there is that need for community activism, for using the processes that we have available, for trying to create new opportunities for influence. So so I guess I'm just sort of leaving you with a last comment like that. Now, before I finally wrap up, I do want to acknowledge our speakers, Margot and Mary Gray, and also we had Colma as well. So would you give them a round of applause? And I'd like to... So just a small token of appreciation for your presentations today. So as we mentioned earlier, we're adopting a subcommittee model in 2023 for the UBC committee, and one subcommittee we want to establish is around submissions. And you know, we've heard today that submissions are a valuable part of the process, and for UBC it's very important that we build a bigger group of capable and confident submission writers, and to make sure that we don't lose the decades of knowledge that are sitting with people like Marg and Marion. You've also heard you know, the number of submissions that Carolyn's doing. We actually need to be able to build on that, build our own capacity as individuals to be able to comment, to bring our local, you know, sort of what we know of our local bushlands and wetlands. Yes, what?
Can I just say that we only do very few submissions that are open, very few, and we do very few clearing permit submissions. So I need a lot more, and we need the knowledge from the community.
Right. So we do. Yeah. So as you said, we do. Yeah. So we could do more if we had more people. I guess we try to focus on the ones that we think are most critical. At times we've worked with our member groups to have a sort of a submissions writing workshop, and we've found that really valuable. We've had times when our member groups have adopted our action points and used our action points for their own submissions, and that has been really great. So thank you all for that. So I do want to finish by inviting you to be part of this subcommittee, to learn with and from local experts, and to play a part in being a voice for the bush. And if you were at our Bush Forever celebrations last month, you would have heard the inspirational Bronwen Keighery say, "Bushland is our natural heritage. Bushland is very much a part of the heritage I wish to leave for all future generations." So this submissions element is part of that. So please think about this. See me or Colma, or just drop us an email or a text or a phone call. So thank you all for coming along and giving up your Sunday afternoon. Thank you to our speakers. It's been so great to have all of the expertise in the room at the same time. We've recorded the session, and we'll be creating content for our website as a toolkit for future submission rounds. And I'd just like to acknowledge that we've funded this workshop through a volunteer grant that we were awarded. And I just want to make a final plug for our last general meeting of the year. It's on Tuesday, 29th of November, and Johanna Riddell, our project officer on our state NRM grant, will be speaking at that and talking about the early learning from that project. And I just want to thank Vicky Caulfield, who's pulled this all together, to the UBC committee and to volunteers such as Robin for helping make this successful. So thank you all. Thank you very much for coming. We've been blown away by how many people rocked up. Thanks.
Hang on, can't go. Oh, can't let it go yet. I just want to say thank you very much to Christine for doing a wonderful job today, but also for being a terrific support to me as the new Executive Officer of the Urban Bushland Council, and just a remarkable leader. So I think you could all agree that she's pretty clever.
Thank you.